So we're going to move straight on to the first question, if I can get these to advance. And thank you to Phil Scriven and Paul Harris, who are having a particularly tough time with certain weeds, and I think this is going to chime with a number of growers. So they're looking for the best way to control field pansy, Bur Chervil, cranesbill, groundsel, willow herb, and corn marigold. These are all tough weeds that we're all having to deal with. So John, tell us about these weeds.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I mean, I think probably worth starting with an overall statement, which is that in all weed control and more broadly weed management, it's never the case that one size fits all. There are always going to be different herbicides and more appropriate timings, and indeed different non-chemical approaches, different rotational approaches that best suit the management of individual species. And in the end, it's for the individual grower and advisor to define their main goal in terms of weed management and their overall control approach, and that's going to suit their specific situation and the combination of weeds that they've got that they're trying to manage. One of the great things about the phenoxy herbicides overall is that there is some really fantastic label information. The labels are really excellent in terms of weed sensitivity, application timings, and weed sizes. And there's also some really great information now on Nufarm's website. If you just Google Phenoxy's Guide, there's a really nice PDF now that goes through sensitivities across different weeds and talks a little bit about growth stages. In terms of the specific weeds that were questions, yeah, we're seeing much more of a diversity of challenges that people are talking about. Field pansies specifically, I think it's important to say, well, for field pansies, it's the case that phenoxys are not the strongest group of herbicides on this species. Within the phenoxy family, the active dicloprop, which is actually only available in the UK as Isomec Ultra, is the strongest option. They're also unaffected by haloxfen methyl, which is the Aralex active. So management or in-crop of field pansy comes down to pre-Ms, so pendimethalin plus and minus picolinidefend, DFF, those kind of actives. Very active on this weed, even at relatively low rates. And then in the spring, sulfonyl ureas have the potential to give really good control, but it's all about getting the application timing and conditions of application right. And I know we'll talk about that a bit later. And then the same question went on and asked about Bur Chervil. And Bur Chervil is a really interesting one. It's coming up more and more. It's weeds like Bur Chervil and wild carrot and some of these other weeds that we see are on the increase, probably as a result of increasing moves towards conservation agriculture approaches, and also some changes in the kind of actives we've got available in the autumn that can be really difficult to control in winter cereals. I think they're also building in the oilseed rape phase. So overall, thinking about good control in the oilseed rape is as important. In NIAB trials, we've got really good results from Isomec Ultra again. I think personally that's down to the dicloprop active, and we're doing a little bit of work to home in on which of the actives is effective. The critical aspect for this weed and for other weeds like this, which are emerging in our winter cereal cropping, controlling early growth stages, not allowing the weed to get too big in the spring. And I think that's true for all herbicides against Bur Chervil. And then cranesbill, that came up specifically in the spring. Probably actually best controlled with sulfonyl urea chemistry, but adding mecaprop as a tank mix to the sulfonyl urea will probably give you the ultimate control, and that's going to be, the mecaprop addition is going to be especially valuable at smaller growth stages. And then groundsel specifically, again, mecaprop or dicamba, mecaprop dicamba products, or again the Isomec Ultra because of the dicloprop mecaprop in Isomec Ultra. So Isomec Ultra is dicloprop, mecaprop and MCPA, and these are the best phenoxy options. But you can also use bromoxynil or an SU, then you can potentially again get very good control in the spring. And then volunteer oilseed rape came up a couple of times. and that's more important, I think, to get good control of the oilseed rape in the non-oilseed rape phases. There are a range of options to get volunteer oilseed rape control. Amongst the phenoxys, we're talking about Mecaprop and MCPA actives, so look out for those in the products. They're both good options, but do look at the label, be realistic about weed size, doses, and sensitivity. So the doses are increased for volunteer oilseed rape control in these products on the label, and that's made very clear. And then keep going down through the list of questions that came up. There was a specific question about cool marigold. Again, another thing which is we're getting more and more questions about. In terms of the phenoxys, we're talking about dicamba or MCPA containing products. But again, for corn marigold, be realistic about the weed size dose that you can achieve control with to get, and be realistic again about timings and the level of control you're going to get. Willow herb, another one which is very much associated with reduced cultivations. We're seeing more and more of it. To step back from the in-crop herbicides, I think one of the critical things with willow herb is to make sure you're getting really effective control pre-drilling and you're not bringing through established willow herb plants into the established crop. I'm not sure that phenoxys are really the right herbicide group to target this weed species with. It's going to be a question of management around effective pre-drilling control, using effective residual chemistry, and then ultimately sulfonylurea, fluroxypyr type options in the spring. And then a couple of questions were around thistles and docks in cereals specifically. Again, thinking about phenoxy options, products containing 2,4-D with and without MCPA. So Depitox is the 2,4-D, Easel is the MCPA. I think in reality with thistles, they can be very challenging in winter cereals, particularly where the winter cereal canopies are a little bit more open. They can actually emerge and appear in the crop towards the end or even after the application dates of some of these herbicides, so be careful. The Easel is an option which can be used all the way up to growth stage 39 though, if that is an issue for you. And then lastly, thank goodness, Tom, you're thinking lastly, the docks, again, in winter cereals, we're talking about Mecaprop, so Duplazan, dicamba, plus and minus MCPA, so the Meacam plus, I think. These are latest application growth stage 31, so it can be difficult to get the timings right. And again, the smaller the plant, the better the level of control you're going to get in the crop. So there are some themes in there. I think there being different approaches for different weeds, using the information that's available.
Well, we're coming back to some of those aspects later in the broadcast, John. But a couple of questions came through while we were talking there. I just wondered whether you could just briefly bring those in. So thank you to Michael Tanaki, who asked about ivy leaf speedwell, and then also Richard Martin has asked. You did mention about volunteer rape, but what about Clearfield rape, John?
Well, the Clearfield rape in the winter cereal phase is well controlled by your Mecaprop MCPA options. It shouldn't make any difference. And obviously, when we talk about that as being a priority, it is because of the development of Clearfield rape. It's your opportunity to clear Clearfield rape volunteers out of the rotation. Make sure they don't build up.
And then ivy leaf speedwell, anything else to add about that? I don't know whether either Jim or Dan wants to come in at all.
Yeah, probably out of the hormones that we've been talking about, I would suggest that probably Mecaprop is would be the one to go for. But again, you know, you would use that in a mix with perhaps one of the sulfonylureas to hot up the activity on it. But yeah, anything that we suggest on our website, we've got a lot of information on both the phenoxys and the sulfonylurea range that we have as Nufarm, but we tend to look at products being used in tandem, which will be a trait of this webinar. You can't look at one single mode of action, and it's just not a sustainable way of looking at it.
One aspect, briefly, I wondered whether you had any views on, John, is this move to regenerative agriculture and conservation agriculture, some of the new trends that we're seeing, how's that changing the spectrum of weeds?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it moves towards conservation agriculture. I mean, conservation agriculture has those 3 pillars. We talk about reducing soil disturbance as much as possible, diversifying the rotation, so diversifying the nature of the crops that you're growing, and then also you're maintaining your cover for 365 days of the year. And each of those pillars have impacts that they're going to have on the weed species, some positive, some negative. Overall, taken together, they almost inevitably mean that we're going to see a reduction in the dominance of these autumn germinating grass weeds, which have been the bane of our life for so long. But alongside that, they mean more of a diversity of weed problems emerging. So if you think about the minimizing the disturbance aspect, particularly around zero-till drilling, we might see a reduction in the stimulation to germinate around drilling, and more seed losses on the soil surface when you've got broader rotations as well. But alongside that, some of these smaller seeded species, which really can only germinate from the top 2 centimeters of the seed bank, which are well suppressed by cultivation, are going to start coming to the fore again. And then if you think about covers 365 days of the year, we've got some of these broadleaf weeds that can complete their life cycle within the time span of a cover. So they're going to be encouraged within that. I mean, the covers 365 days a year bring along with it a really critical need to start the crop clean and get good control of the cover and the weeds within the cover. And then if you think about the other aspect, of course, the diversity of cropping intrinsically means a diversity of weeds, in terms of weeds with a range of germination habits, reproductive habits, dormancy habits, being encouraged by that diversity of cropping. So taken together, it really does mean less dominance of the grass weeds, autumn's emerging grass weeds that have been the bane of our life, but alongside that, more diversity, and that brings with it a need to maintain as much diversity, and Dan touched on it, as much diversity as we can in the herbicides that we're using, but also the non-chemical approaches that we're using.